August 12th, 1995. Hey, been a while since you were in town, Stokely Myers said as Henry Bowman came through the door of the gun shop. Anything new going on? Just looking at rocks for people when I'm working, and turning them into powder with your 4-bore when you're not, Stokely said, laughing. Something like that. I got a 2-bore as a matter of fact. No. Yes, a single-barrel Farquharson a guy in Vermont made up. Shot it a bunch last week with a 3,145 grain turned brass bullet at a little over 1,200. You'll love it. Well, bring it on in next time, damn it. Hey, you see today's headlines? Stokely asked as he tossed that morning's St. Louis Post-Dispatch onto the glass-top pistol case next to the cash register. Henry Bowman looked down at the newspaper. FBI targets, 4 more in, Weaver case. Freeze ex-deputy included, criminal inquiry launched. I heard about that on CNN last night, Stoke. They're throwing a few more babies out of the lifeboat, hoping to keep the sharks occupied until they can get to land. 4 more paid vacations for those peckernecks. Stokely was referring to the last sentence of the lengthy article, which admitted that the 4 agents were receiving full pay for the duration of their suspensions. They admit to destroying evidence, Henry said as he scanned the news piece. That's always good for public opinion, and I see Potts is mucho pissed about being demoted from deputy director, he commented, referring to the supervisor in charge of the Weaver fiasco. You should have heard what some of the guys who come in here were saying when they read Potts got the same letter of censure for Ruby Ridge as he did for losing a cellular phone. I can imagine. And if I were Lon Horiuchi, Henry said, referring to the FBI sniper who had shot Vicky Weaver in the head, I would hire myself the best damn criminal defense lawyer in the country. I'd move to a state like New York or New Jersey, and I'd blow the governor so that he wouldn't let me be extradited to Idaho. If that boy doesn't watch it, he's going to find himself facing a prison sentence. No shit. Hey, if you really want to get sick, read this. He handed Henry a copy of the latest Gun Week, a national weekly newspaper focusing on firearms-related issues. Page 2, the new Gun Week, Friday, August 11th, 1995. BATF gets its own 22-plane Air Force. Here's news that may make some people sleep a little less soundly at night. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, BATF, is getting its own Air Force. The Washington Times, quoting confirmation by BATF spokesperson Susan McCarran, reported on July 18th that BATF has obtained 22 counterinsurgency, heavy weapons-capable military aircraft. However, the confirmation to the Times seems to have come only after unofficial sources had reported on the transfer of planes to BATF, and only after Soldier of Fortune magazine had gone to press with their September 1995 issue, in which reporter James Pate disclosed that the aircraft deal had been consummated under rather murky circumstances. The September issue of Soldier of Fortune hit the newsstand circulation system just prior to the publication of the Times report on July 18th. What the Times did not disclose, and what SOF did report, was that the aircraft deal began in a somewhat covert manner last September, almost a year earlier. That's when the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, recorded conveyance of title to at least 2 of the OV-10D Broncos from the General Services Administration to Midair Salvage, Inc. of Franklin Park, NJ, and on the same day from Midair Salvage to America Warbirds, Inc. of Gaithersburg, MD. The FAA documents obtained by Soldier of Fortune relate directly to 2 specific aircraft serial numbers, the 300-mile-per-hour OV-10D planes, one of several designations used by the Marine Corps during the Vietnam War for gunfire and missile support of ground troops, and by the Air Force during Operation Desert Storm for night observation, have been transferred from the Defense Department to BATF. The turboprop aircraft, which will be used for day and night surveillance support, were designed to locate people on the ground through their body heat. When used by military services, the planes were equipped with infrared tracking systems, ground mapping radar, laser rangefinders, gun sights, and 20mm cannons. BATF spokeswoman Susan McCarran confirmed that the agency had obtained the aircraft, but noted that they had been stripped of their armament. She told the Times that 9 of the OVL-0Ds were operational, and that the remaining 13 were being used for spare parts. No weapons. We have 9 OVL-0Ds that are unarmed. They have no WAPO-NS on them, Ms. McCarran said. They are being used for surveillance and photography purposes. The remainder are being used for SPRE parts. Ms. McCarran said the aircraft were obtained from the Defense Department when DoD was getting rid of them, and that other agencies had also received some of the airplanes. However, There had been no confirmation that the planes acquired by other agencies are exactly the same models. The BATF has confirmed that the type of aircraft they have acquired features a longer, pointed nose, which houses the forward-looking infrared FLIR system used to detect heat emitted by people and heat-producing objects. The Times pointed out that the transfer of the aircraft to ATF comes at a time of heightened public skepticism and congressional scrutiny of the agency's ability to enforce the law without trampling on the rights of citizens. The Times noted BATF's image suffered greatly in the aftermath of its 1993 raid and subsequent shootout at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, TX, during which 4 agents and 6 Davidians were killed. It sustained another public relations blow after it was revealed that BATF agents helped organize a Whitesonly Good Old Boys roundup in the Tennessee Hills. See Gun Week, August 4th, 1995. One Senate staffer said there was some real interest in BATF's acquisition of the aircraft and that questions probably will be asked very soon of the agency about the specifics of their use in the locations where they have been assigned. Michael Pruitt, foreman at Business Jet Designs of Shawnee, OK, confirmed that 2 of the BATF aircraft had been painted at his facility and that at least one more of the OVL-0DS was on the way. Pruitt said the aircraft were painted dark blue with red and white trim. The sources said the paint jobs cost about $20,000 each. The firm's owners, Johnny Patterson, told associates in June that he expects to be painting at least 12% of the BATF aircraft, but was unsure whether he could move all of them fast enough through his shop. Infrared system. According to the Times sources, the BATF's OVL-0DS recently were overhauled and were equipped with a state-of-the-art forward-looking infrared system that allows the pilot to locate and identify targets at night, similar to the tracking system on the Apache Advanced Attack Helicopter. Designed by Rockwell International, the OV-10D originally was outfitted with 2 7.62 2mm machine guns. It also was modified to carry 1 Sidewinder missile under each wing, bombs, firebombs, rocket packages, and cluster bombs. The OV-10D can carry a 20mm gun with 1,500 rounds of ammunition. During THE Vietnam War, the OV-LODs flew over 200 combat missions in which they were credited with killing 300 enemy troops. As Soldier of Fortune pointed out, the BATF's Bronco Squadron is troubling for 2 main reasons. First, the Bureau apparently was trying to hide ownership of the OVL-0ODs by transferring title through one phony company to another. A check of the 2 company names showed that the address given for mid-air salvage was a townhouse with no apparent commercial activity. American Warbird's address belongs to an electronics and radio office for BATF Special Operations Division. Second, an air of suspicion surrounds the financial transactions and the secretive allocation of government funds. These are questions which Congress may want to address during appropriations hearings. If BATF has a legitimate use for such aircraft, why the furtiveness of the acquisition? Boy, now doesn't this give you a warm, fuzzy feeling about the future, Henry asked when he had finished the piece. It's worse than when ATF busted into that Maryland gun show promoter's house and the woman agent stomped his cats to death earlier this year, Stokely agreed, referring to a recent outrage that had made some of the papers. Warplanes for a bunch of stumblefuck tax agents? What's it going to take for these guys to get the picture, Stoke? Damned if I know, Henry. Damned if I know. December 20th, 1995. What the hell is that? Thomas J. Fleming's brother-in-law demanded, pointing his finger at a prominent billboard ahead of them on the right. Fleming had just picked up his wife's sibling at the airport, and they were sitting in rush-hour traffic on the inner belt headed south. There was a worker on a scaffolding on the left side of the large sign. You haven't heard about that? Fleming asked as he turned up the car's air conditioner. Not surprising, I guess, since you don't live here. For that matter, it's been getting almost no local press either. The papers and news editors hate it, but they can't disagree with the facts, so they ignore it. It's been paid for by the family of a murdered carjacking victim. Some woman with a bad judgment to buy a Jeep Cherokee instead of some other sport utility that African-American gang members find less desirable. What's the deal? The woman was unarmed, and after the murder, one of the gun groups unearthed a letter the victim had written the governor 6 weeks before, told Flanagan to change his position on the concealed carry issue and support a licensing system for honest adults. Sent along a bunch of documentation that licensees cause no problems in any of the 41 states where permits are available. Said the legislature trusted her at the hospital with other people's lives, but not out in the parking lot with her own. She was a doctor, nurse anesthetist. That was a big enough embarrassment to the governor, but then the hospital supervisor told the papers that she had also taken several days of unpaid leave to travel to Jefferson City. Woman went to see her legislators about the issue and tried to get into the governor's office, but had no luck there. All this got a lot of press after the murder, and then the dead woman's family ponied up for the billboard. That 117-feet figure is the murders since Flanagan took office in '92. I thought there were about 200 killings a year. They only count unarmed victims over 21 that have no criminal record, and only when the victim is killed outside his or her home. The felon-on-felon killings and victims under 21 are excluded because neither group would be eligible for a carry license. At home you can protect yourself, and if you don't, it's your decision, not the government's. That kind of information on victims is readily available. The newspapers don't print it, if that's what you mean, but there's hundreds of thousands of hardcore supporters in this state, some of them cops with access to crime databases. Every time someone hears of a killing, it gets checked out immediately. Researched and documented. Whether the papers picked it up or not, a lot of editors have egg on their faces because of it. Are they about to take it down? The guest asked, pointing at the worker on the scaffolding. No, the family's promised to keep paying for the space until the law gets changed or the governor gets thrown out. That guy's just going up there to change the number. Think it'll make any difference in the election? Maybe make Flanagan's defeat humiliating instead of merely embarrassing. Guys pulled a George Bush. Flanagan death clock. 117 honest adults murdered because the governor doesn't trust you. Paid for by the family of the late Alicia T. Bolton, and cut his own throat politically. With or without the death clock, present day. April 17th. I think this may be what we're looking for, the technician said to his superior. There's a bunch of crap about ammo first that you can ignore, then it gets interesting. Listen. He punched the play button on the tape recorder. So, did you get your taxes done on time? Came the voice from the machine. That's Kane talking to Henry Bowman in Missouri, the technician said quickly. Yeah, last thing I want to do is file an extension and have it hanging over me for another 5 months, or whatever it is, Henry Bowman answered. Besides, that's why God invented accountants, so they can deal with it and all I have to do is write the check. We got any ammo coming from anywhere? He asked, changing the subject. Last I heard, a shipment of West German, 308, was about to come in and Dale was supposed to get a bunch of it. Yeah, but it was 15 cents and turned out that a lot of it had been stored underwater. Got a whole bunch of headsets and now Dale's trying to blow it out for components at a dime. Shit. That's 25 grand a container down the toilet, and he still has to hump it around to get rid of it. How many containers did he get stuck with? Don't ask, Kane replied. Anyway, feds aren't approving many Form 6s right now. China's still out, but I'm working on some 7.62.54 rands from Russia. How much? A nickel in Goryunov belts. Man, that'd be the nuts. I've got a couple of top covers for my 17 ALS, and I've still got that pair of Chinese Maxims. But can we get it in that way? Bowman asked suddenly. He was referring to the magazine ban, the so-called crime bill, which Congress had passed in September of 1994. The fact that the ammunition was loaded in metal belts would likely cause Imports Branch to refuse the application. We'll have to see. I'm not paying for it until it lands on my doorstep. If it's good stuff, I'll take a container at any price under 6 cents, Henry said. That's what, $20,000? Something like that. Belts and cans add to the weight. A standard container load was 20 tons, which was deliverable in one semi-trailer. It's kind of a weird deal, Kane went on. The stuff's in Israel, and What the hell were the Israelis doing with a bunch of 7.62 Russian? Henry broke in. Beats me, they've got a zillion rounds of it, though. I came across it because I'm still trying to get that Israeli 308 AP on an exemption certificate for that deal with Sacco Defense. You mean you don't have that 308 yet? Henry demanded in disbelief. From 1994? No, this is some more because they still got problems. Probably have to wait forever again on this batch too, though. The federal agents listening to the tape did not grasp what Alan Kane and Henry Bowman were talking about, beyond the fact that they were having trouble getting ammunition approved for import, nor did they care. Imports was not their department. Anyway, Kane went on, reason I called, I talked to Phil, and this summer is the peak of a cycle and supposed to be the best one for Jackson more than 20 years. Don't know it'll be that good, but you want to go back to the Posse-Maroy like we did in '69? When you going? Probably leave here early June. Gonna take my deuce and a half. Want to come? How long are you gonna be out there? A month, maybe, if my ammo holds out that long. There was a long pause before Henry replied. I doubt I can stay more than 2 or 3 weeks. Okay if I fly back a little early? Yeah, sure. Then I'm in, partner. Great. Just keep me posted if your timetable changes, because I'm going to have to juggle some things to take off for that long. No problem. Hey, dumb question, but did you ever transfer me those A4S? I got 3 guys screaming at me, and I can't even give them serial numbers, and... Kane's voice was cut off as the agent snapped off the tape recording. The rest is just gun talk, the agent explained. When did this conversation take place? The supervisor asked. Last night. We'll be continuing to monitor Kane and Bowman to make sure they don't change their plans, but based on what we've observed in past history, Alan Kane sticks to schedules he has made, and he is not apt to let anything interrupt his western trip. Keep the tap on Kane's line and get one put on Bowman's. We still got Millet wired? Yes, sir. Good. Keep monitoring him, too. The supervisor smiled. Get a proposal drawn up and submit it for my approval, he instructed. I want it by Tuesday. I'll get right on it, April 20th. Okay, fittings are all tight. Start pumping, the man from Wingfoot Dry Cleaning Supply in Kansas City said as he stood up and prepared to put the orange and white sawhorse in front of the driveway. It was 5:58 a.m. and Ace Cleaners would open in 2 minutes. Before the man could block the entrance to the Ace Cleaners lot, the first customer of the day pulled in. The driver of the late model Cadillac cut the wheel sharply, just as the car's left front tire rolled over the high-pressure hose at the junction of hose and brass fitting. The combination of the weight of the car, twisting motion of the tire, and rough asphalt was enough to tear the high-pressure line. Dry cleaning fluid began to pour out of the torn hose, forming a puddle underneath the car. The man did not notice this immediately. He had already gone inside the office with his paperwork. Excuse me, ma'am, the Wingfoot employee said as he walked back out of the building. Would you mind pulling your car up about another 10 feet? We've got to get at the... Oh, Christ, the man yelled when he saw the pool of fluid. Ronnie, shut her off now. We got a busted line. The man at the truck did as he was told. What's the problem? Said a short, balding man named Billings as he stepped out of the building and squinted in the bright sunlight. Billings was Ace Cleaner's owner. Ah, hell, he said, shaking his head when he saw the 8-foot diameter pool of fluid soaking into the hot asphalt. He was imagining the horrendous amount of paperwork he was going to have to do. There goes my morning. April 21st. Dig up the entire parking lot, the owner of Ace Cleaners yelled into the phone. For 5 gallons of fluid? You've got to be kidding. Billings listened with mounting dread as the government employee explained the new EPA regulations. The entire Ace Cleaners parking lot had to be removed and the contaminated asphalt processed to remove all traces of the spilled fluid. But we're in an industrial area, it's all paved over and there isn't a tree for blocks. Do your people think it's going to get in the water table? Our parking lot has had cars drip oil on it for 40 years, and even if they didn't, there's petroleum in the goddamn asphalt itself, for Christ's sake. Billings held his tongue as the man on the other end began telling him to call Wingfoot, the cleaning supplies company, and get them to contact their insurance carrier. The dry cleaning shop's owner would soon learn that Wingfoot's rates had long ago become unaffordable, and the company was going naked. Ace and Wingfoot were now jointly and severally liable for cleaning up the toxic spill. The initial estimate for this procedure would be over $500,000. April 27th. You're kidding. Dead serious, Alex. Everyone has to go through it. New department policy. Sexual harassment awareness training, shat, huh? Sounds a lot more like shit to me, sir. Alex Newman put his hand over the receiver, laughed, and made a face at the other FBI agent in the Cheyenne office, Trey Mullins. That's not the kind of attitude the Bureau likes to see its men display, Agent Newman, the voice on the other end of the phone said sternly. Newman stopped laughing and took his hand away quickly. I understand, sir, Alex Newman said, but there aren't any women FBI agents here, none. And it's not like I'm some 20-year-old kid. Hell, sir, I'm not all that far away from early retirement. Trey Mullins began doing an old man with a cane pantomime. No exceptions, Alex. The man in Washington chuckled. And age has nothing to do with it. Who knows? You might be the Bureau's Lyndon Johnson. Agent Newman made one final plea. Look, does it matter that here in Cheyenne there are practically no women to harass, period, let alone women FBI agents? Not at all, Alex. It's just like any other training the FBI requires. You may not think you'll need it, but the Bureau's not about to take that chance. You could get transferred again. Think of it as an insurance policy for us. So when do I have to take this shat class? It's a 10-day course at Quantico that's being... 10 days? Alex Newman almost yelled into the phone. What the hell are they going to talk about to a bunch of old guys for 10 days? Best pickup lines to use with the forensic staff? The voice on the other end of the phone turned icy. The course is 10 days long. It will be given at the Quantico facility starting at 8 a.m. sharp on June 9th. Our travel office will mail you an airplane ticket for a June 8th departure. Agent Mullins can take care of the office while you're away. Don't miss your flight. FBI agent and HRT member Alex Newman started to apologize, but realized he was holding a dead receiver. Did you have to go through this crap? He asked his friend, Harker Edward Mullins whom everyone called Trey. Mullins shrugged. Yeah, they had some stupid course I had to take a while back. Wasn't 10 days long, but it seemed like it. Guess they've changed things some. Cover your ass is the name of the game, pal. Waste of time. Yeah, well, it's not like we're overwhelmed with work. Even by myself, I won't have much to do around here. I'm going to be bored to tears in D.C., you know that, don't you? Trey Mullins shrugged in reply. Both men's predictions would prove to be dead wrong. Hello? Kurt, Orville Crocker up in Wyoming. I'm not interrupting your dinner, am I? No, we eat about 6 around here, Kurt Benke said with a smile. And I was going to call you in the next day or so. I finished that piece for your canon. You're kidding, it's been less than a week. Well, since I retired, there's more time for gun work, and I still had my sketches from the one I made for Henry Bowman. The second one always goes a lot faster. Orville Crocker was a Class 3 dealer in Laramie, Wyoming. He owned a finished Lotte gas-operated 20mm anti-tank cannon like the one Henry Bowman had bought from Potomac Arms in 1968. The obsolete Lotte Solitherm ammo could be had in Europe for 50 cents a round, but the 1968 import ban on non-sporting cartridges had dried up the U.S. supply, and the domestic price was now over $30 a shot. Reloading the brass with resized U.S. Vulcan projectiles was the only option for serious 20mm shooters such as Henry Bowman and Orville Crocker. The problem with the Lotte was that, unlike the Solitherm, the gun ejected spent rounds straight down when it fired, and the case mouths got torn up when they hit the ground. This ruined them for reloading. Henry's solution was to have Kurt Benke make a new gas regulator for the gun, with no holes in it. The tolerances were such that Henry had elected to have Benke do the work, rather than machine one himself. The undrilled regulator deactivated the Lotte's gas operating system, leaving the fired case in the chamber. This turned the semi-automatic gun into a manually operated repeater where the shooter had to retract the 11-pound bolt manually every shot by cranking the charging handle several revolutions. It was not nearly as convenient as aiming and pulling the trigger, but it saved the brass. Crocker had seen Henry set up at the Knob Creek Chute, wheedled Benke's name out of Henry, and convinced the St. Louis gunsmith to repeat his efforts. Well, that's a nice surprise, Crocker said into the phone. I'm not used to getting gun work finished ahead of schedule, but that's not why I called. Henry said you're a prairie dog hunter. A good friend of mine has a ranch about 50 miles from here, leases something like 10,000 acres to graze cattle. He's been after me to come hunt prairie dogs up at his place, but all I've got to shoot are pistols and NFA stuff, you know, machine guns and cannons. I've wanted to get a good varmint rifle built, and Henry says you're the best. How'd you like to come up here for a few days? We'll drive out to his place in my truck, and you can show me how it's done. I've got good binoculars and a tripod, and I'll spot for you. You can drive here if you want, but what I thought you might rather do is ship your guns and ammo up ahead by UPS and fly into Cheyenne. Save you a lot of boring hours on the road. Well, Benke said, thinking about the offer, I don't have a hunt planned yet this summer. Henry Bowman had told Kurt Benke his summer schedule looked pretty full, and Benke's son that liked to shoot was unable to get a week off of work at that time of year. The gunsmith could tolerate a 1,600-mile highway trip, but like most people, he preferred to have someone along to share the driving and provide company. Orville Crocker's offer sounded good. Are you sure your friend wouldn't mind? Crocker laughed at the question. He'll complain there aren't more of us. What time of summer you want to come up? Mid, late June? Sure, that would work. I'll have to call the airlines and see what flights they've got. While you're doing that, make up a list of stuff you want me to have when you get here. You know, sandbags, screwdriver sets, things like that. I already have most of that stuff around here, and anything I have to buy I probably ought to own anyway. That way you won't have to ship anything except guns and ammo. We'll mostly shoot off folding bipods, but that's a good point. If you're serious, you ought to order a portable shooting bench from Armor Metal Products. I'll send you their ad with your gas regulator, and I can ship up a couple extra rifles and match ammo I've loaded for them. If you like the way either of them works for you, I'll make you a good price on it. Cost a third of what it would take to build one up new. It's got so in my old age I've ended up with more match rifles than I know what to do with. Sounds great. Let's plan on sometime around the end of June, and I'll be talking to you about the details between now and then. I'll send that part for your big gun out tomorrow. Then I guess I'd better get to my loading bench, he joked. I'm looking forward to meeting you, Kurt. Same here. Bye now, he said, and hung up the phone. May 2nd. Taylor Lowell? The man in the suit asked. That's me, Lowell answered as he straightened up from inspecting the left brake rotor on his 1994 Pitts S2B. Actually, Taylor Lowell is my dad. I'm Taylor Lowell, Jr. He wiped his right hand on a shop towel and extended it towards the stranger, who ignored the gesture. Mendez Fall, the man said, unfolding his credentials. Here for a ramp check. Is this plane registered either experimental or exhibition? He asked abruptly. No, it's straight factory, Lowell said, taken aback. He had purchased the immaculate 260-horsepower acrobatic biplane 7 months earlier for $104,500, with less than 300 hours total time on its Hobbs meter. Sutherland ferried it from his airport in Houston to Lowell's local strip outside Phoenix. Since that time, Lowell had put 110 hours on the craft. Flying, particularly acrobatic flying, was the U.S. West Executive's one indulgence. The FAA inspector stepped up onto the lower wing and peered into the cockpit. What's this? He asked, pointing at the seat. That's a trickle charger I've got hooked to the battery to keep the gel cell at full charge if I miss a couple weekends. Got an STC for it? The FAA man demanded, referring to the supplemental type certificate that the FAA required before any modifications to a factory airplane could be legally performed. No, I take it out before I go flying. I've got it hooked up for right now because I haven't been up in 2 weeks. Then, because he was eager to go flying and the FAA man's ramp check was cutting into his airtime, Taylor Lowell made a huge mistake. I mean, Jesus, it's just a little trickle charger. His tone of voice implied tolerant amusement. You have the unit bolted to the battery terminals, which... That's so it can't spark, like spring clips can do, Lowell broke in quickly. It also makes it a permanent installation, Mendez said smoothly. Christ, I'm not going to go flying with it still hooked up. Jesus, talk about the princess and the pea, Lowell said with a laugh as he imagined having to fly his airplane while sitting on a metal box the size of half a loaf of bread. It's still a permanent installation, Mendez said with a smile as he reached into the cockpit and withdrew the small piece of FAA cardboard from its clear plastic pouch. I'm afraid I'm going to have to revoke your airworthiness certificate. For now, he added as he stepped off the wing. What? We'll need some time to check for other airworthiness violations and more people. We'll need to go over this aircraft carefully, Mr. Lowell. The Pitts pilot's jaw dropped and his face turned bright red. You can't ground my... And I'm going to recommend that you be given an up-to-date medical evaluation. Your appearance indicates that your blood pressure may be over FAA limits. I also want to see the results of a neurological exam. I'll tell the tower your pilot status is no longer current. With that, Inspector Mendez turned on his heel and walked away. Taylor Lowell, Jr. had over 2,000 flight hours in a dozen different types of private aircraft. He had inherited his passion from his father, who had first taken him flying shortly after the boy had learned to walk. Taylor Lowell, Sr. was an ex-Navy pilot who had had to quit flying in his late 60s when his eyesight began to go. He had never forgotten the instructor who had first instilled in him the combination of respect, awe, and delight for what an airplane could be made to do. The old man always smiled when he talked about his flight school days in 1944. His son's favorite stories were the ones his father told about the instructor who liked to climb out on the lower wing of the open cockpit trainers where he could talk right in the student's ear and use his one free hand to punctuate his lessons. As Taylor Lowell, Jr. stood on the flight line, hyperventilating and willing his heart rate to subside, he cursed himself for speaking his mind to a government agent who held such power over his future. I'm a goddamn fool, he said under his breath. Then he thought of what his father's reaction would be, and he closed his eyes. Dad doesn't need to know. Dad doesn't need to know. May 21st. Irwin Mann sipped his coffee and turned to the obituary section of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch before looking at the rest of the paper. It was a practice he'd observed for many years. Face death and accept it, then move on. Mann scanned the listings but saw no one's name he recognized. Satisfied, he closed the paper and started in on the front page. A news item near the bottom caught his eye. Sol Schenker, Gov.T. Holocaust historian and advisor dies. President lauds unyielding commitment, seeks successor. Compiled from News Services, Washington, D.C., Sol Schenker, whose calm but relentless dedication to recording the facts of the Holocaust died Sunday. He was 92. Mr. Schenker, who underwent cancer surgery in 1993, died at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, his grandson Alvin Rosenfeld said. He said Mr. Schenker had had a stroke on Thursday. When doctors could detect no remaining brain function, family members requested that Schenker be removed from life support systems, Rosenfeld said. At the time of his death, Schenker was the spokesman for the Washington-based Center for Holocaust Studies and served as the primary link between the center and the White House. It will be very difficult to replace Sol Schenker, the president said in a news conference last night. He filled a vital role. We will need the same serious, unyielding commitment to history. See Schenker, page 3. Erwin Mann folded the page back and finished the article. The president said he needed someone to fill the void left by Schenker's death. For a brief moment, Mann wished that he could apply for the position. Then he laughed at himself. "Old man, they want a scholar to make the people remember the tragedy," he said aloud. Not an old fighter to shame them with talk of what might have been. Erwin Mann went on to the other articles in the newspaper, but his mind would not focus on them. June 2nd. "We just picked this up this morning, sir. It looks like everything's on schedule," the ATF agent said as he hit the play button on the tape recorder. "Hello? You got all your ammo loaded?" came the voice that all the men in the room knew as Alan Kane's. "As a matter of fact, I do. I actually got done a little ahead of schedule. You still coming by on the 5th to pick me up?" Henry Bowman asked. "Yeah, probably blow out of here about 5 in the morning. Should wheel into your place about noon. Then we'll load up all your shit and hit the road. That's still okay?" "Yeah, perfect." "Good. Hey, I wish you were here right now. I just got the breach ring from my 105. Damn thing took 9 months to clear. They're a bitch for one guy to put together. Hell, just hook the 105 to the back of the deuce and a half, throw the breach ring in the back, we'll put it together here at my place, and we can take it with us. Shoot it out over Mormon Gulch." There was a long pause as Henry Bowman realized his friend was actually considering the idea. "Alan, I was just kidding. Jesus, it's 1,800 miles each way. We lunch a bearing in that thing and we're fucked big time." "Yeah, I know," his friend said wistfully. It was obvious from his tone of voice that he wanted to reassemble and test the howitzer as soon as possible. "Look," Henry said, "I'll make you a deal. Since you're coming here to pick up me and all my stuff on the way out and probably dropping it off by yourself on the way back, here's what I'll do. As soon as you get back to your place next month, I'll whip on over for a couple days and we'll get that thing up and running. Take it out to the reservoir or the old strip mines and give it a workout. That way you won't be tempted to try putting it together tonight, drop it on your foot, and ruin the trip for both of us. And it'll give you something to look forward to when you're driving back by yourself. That fair?" "Yeah, that's a deal." "Okay, I'll look for you in 3 days then, around lunchtime. Make sure you got plenty of ammo for your wheel guns. Phil says the jacks are so thick there's a dead one every 10 feet on all the roads around Mackey. Well, for the 44s, I've got 12,000 Hempstead hollow points, 165 grain with the cavity that goes almost to the base. Goes 1850 out of my Smiths and stays in 3 inches at 100. New Winchester brass with the old fast lot of H110. You still got some of that? Bought 1,600 pounds of it from Juris when he went bust in 73. Got 2 kegs left. Wish we could still get powder at $1 a pound." "That's the truth. Hey, I gotta run. Anything else?" "Nah, just making sure you were all set." "Yeah, I'm in good shape. See you in a few days. Bye." There was the sound of 2 receivers being hung up, and the agent hit the stop button on the tape player. He looked up and grinned at his supervisor. "When Mr. Kane gets home," he said with a laugh, "he's going to have quite a little surprise waiting for him, isn't he, sir?" The senior man shook his head in reply. "He'll be national news long before he gets back to Indiana." Henry Bowman set the alarm to his house and walked out to the detached 6-car garage. He carried a nylon bag in his left hand and a thin plastic case in his right. The bag contained some papers, his shaving kit, a pair of running shoes, clean socks and underwear, and his cellular phone and battery charger. The plastic case housed his laptop computer, portable printer, and other related accessories. Henry put down his computer case, unbolted the walk-in door to the garage with his key, reached in, and pressed the leftmost of the 3 buttons that operated the overhead doors. He closed and bolted the walk-in door and walked to the far end of the garage where he kept his motorcycles. The BMW was the least powerful of the 6 bikes Henry owned, but it was the only one he had that was truly an all-purpose machine. While the other 5 were made purely for on-pavement use, the 1989 GS1000 was designed from the start to be a competent mount on asphalt, dirt, gravel, sand, and, in a pinch, snow. It had over 8 inches of suspension travel on each end, knobby tires, and was lighter than any other L0000cc machine available from a factory. It also had a 7-gallon tank that gave it an over 300-mile range, integrated bags and luggage rack, and a complete set of maintenance tools. It was one of the few factory-built motorcycles designed to carry a rider and a quantity of gear comfortably over substantial distances, regardless of whether the route was pavement, unimproved terrain, or both. Several similar bikes, in modified form, had competed successfully in the Paris-Dakar rally over the years. Henry had acquired the BMW in a trade for a 1921 Thompson with mismatched serial numbers 3 weeks before, and he had put less than 100 miles on it. The bike's former owner would not receive federal approval to take possession of his gun for 3 to 12 months, depending on the whim of the feds, but he had done business with Henry Bowman before, and he knew that Henry wanted the BMW for his Idaho trip. He had agreed to let Henry take immediate possession, and Henry had thrown in a spare 50-round drum and 5 30-round stick mags for good measure. Be good to put some miles on this thing and shake it out a little before I rely on it as an emergency vehicle, Henry thought as he slid his laptop case into the BMW's right-hand luggage bag. The computer took up about half the volume of the compartment, so Henry also threw in 6 nylon tie-down straps for securing the bike in Alan Kane's 2.5-ton truck. The nylon bag with his other things in it fit easily into the left side compartment. A folded rain suit was already stored under a cargo net on the bike's luggage rack. Henry Bowman put on his jacket, helmet, and gloves, wheeled the bike out of the garage, set the garage alarm, and pushed the button which lowered the overhead door. He threw his right leg over the tall saddle, flicked up the side stand, turned on the fuel, set the choke, turned the key in the ignition, pulled in the clutch lever, and hit the starter button with his right thumb. The 1-liter opposed twin caught on the second revolution and settled into a fast idle. Henry fumbled his sunglasses out of his shirt pocket with gloved fingers and slid them onto his face, then lowered the visor. He snicked the shift lever into first, O-penned the throttle, and eased the clutch out until it caught. As Henry rode towards the gate at the end of his property, he glanced at his fuel gauge and remembered that he had topped off the tank the last time he had ridden the G's. "Wonder if I can make it all the way without a fuel stop," Henry said to himself as he eased the choke off, opened the throttle, then tested the brakes. "Be dark by the time I get there. I hope Alan hasn't given himself a hernia already. What have you got for me, Ben?" "We've received something I thought you should know about, Mr. President. A letter from a man in Missouri who is interested in filling Saul's position at the center. What are his qualifications?" "He says up front that he has no teaching experience and done no research in the last 20 years. Death camp survivor?" "Actually, no. Although from what he was able to learn after the war, it would appear that his entire family died at Treblinka and Auschwitz." The assistant director of the Center for Holocaust Studies gave a small smile before dropping the other shoe. "What I thought you might find interesting, sir, is that Mr. Irwin Mann, if he is to be believed, is a survivor not of the death camps, but of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising." "The Warsaw Uprising? I thought there were no survivors." The assistant director shook his head. "That's a common misconception, Mr. President. Almost everyone died when the Nazis burned the ghetto to the ground, but there were a few who managed to escape through the sewers. Most who tried it died from suffocation or drowning. The stormtroopers put poison smoke candles in the sewers, and in some cases pumped them full of water also, but a few made it. That has been well documented." "What makes Mr. Mann so interesting, assuming his story is true, is that he was part of the uprising itself, not merely a resident of the ghetto at the time of the uprising. All known survivors of the ghetto, or I should say all known survivors who are still alive today, were living in the ghetto, but did not take an active role in the insurrection itself." The assistant director's eyes were alive. "Can you check on the authenticity of his claims?" "We are doing that right now. From the names he gave us of the participants in his group and their occupations before the war, our researchers should be able to tell very shortly whether or not Mr. Mann is what he claims to be. From what they have found so far, it looks like Irwin Mann is the genuine article." "How do the others at the center feel about him for the position?" "Mr. President, I would be less than honest if I told you all of them were as enthusiastic as I. There are some who would prefer a Holocaust scholar over any candidate who is not a full-time historian." "But this Mr. Mann would be your first choice, Ben, provided his bona fides check out?" "Yes, sir. Even if the alternative was to offer you the spot?" The assistant director was startled by the question, but he answered quickly. "Yes, Mr. President, no question. Someday I hope to be director of the center, I'll admit that. But for the presidential liaison, the center needs someone who can inspire those not normally interested in our cause. America likes heroes. They're a big help with funding, if nothing else. He paused, then added what he suspected the president was already thinking. And to be blunt, sir, I myself would prefer a position that would endure through a number of administrations. Good point, the president admitted. His health okay? He says it is, and he certainly doesn't have arthritis. His letter was hammered out on a manual typewriter as neatly as a government secretary from 50 years ago would have done it. You'll check him out for skeletons in his closet? The chief executive asked. The assistant director smiled faintly. Yes, sir, we're fairly good at that. Hey, Eugene. Hey, fella, Henry Bowman said as he petted Alan Kane's dog, which was wagging his entire hindquarters along with his tail. Eugene was a mixed breed that was half Australian shepherd, and the animal was using every ounce of his self-control not to jump on his friend from Missouri. What the hell are you doing here? Alan Kane yelled with a grin when Henry had removed his helmet, and Kane saw who had ridden into his yard. Kane was in jeans and a sleeveless t-shirt, and was very greasy. He had been working on his howitzer, which was in between the old barn and the house, using the halogen floodlights mounted on the barn to illuminate the entire yard. Afraid I'd forget to pick you up? Henry squinted at his friend, who was only a silhouette. The brilliant lights made everything throw long shadows across the yard. The thought crossed my mind. No, after I hung up, I figured you'd be unable to resist working on your 105, so I came to help. I wanted to put some miles on this bike anyway, see if there were any bugs in it. I thought we'd take it with us. If we have any vehicle trouble out there, it'll sure beat hiking out for parts or help. I've still got some paperwork to do before we go, but I brought it with me, and I can help you load up. You just wanted an excuse to ride your sickle somewhere, Alan Kane laughed. That was part of it. Well, I'm glad you showed up. I got in a couple new night vision scopes that are supposed to be the nuts. SEAL Team 6 wants a second opinion before they buy a bunch of them. I wanted to take at least one of them with us, but they've got to have them both back right away, so I'm shipping them out before we leave. I was using one of them last night, and the clarity was something else. I'll get cleaned up, and we'll see what you think. Henry nodded in reply, but he was staring at the howitzer sitting in the yard. Tell me about this thing. Oh man, you're going to love it, Alan Kane said enthusiastically as he turned toward the surplus field piece. Fires a 37-pound bullet at 1,400 feet per second. Bores mint. Got a little machining to do to fit the breech ring, but with the two of us, I think we can have it up and running tomorrow. Hey, quit standing around. I thought you said you came here to help. Henry smiled and walked over to his friend. Okay, boss. Show me what to do. June 4th. What are you doing with golf balls? Henry asked his friend when he noticed the box of Titleists on the workshop shelf. Alan Kane laughed. Guy I know told me they were just a little bigger than 40 millimeters. I'm going to try to make a steel case that holds A32 blank or something like that and see if I can shoot them out of an M79. Should be a fun practice round, if it works. Hey, that sounds like something I'd think of, Henry said with a laugh. Tell me if it works. Got anything for me today? They heard the UPS driver yell. Alan Kane got up from his chair inside the old barn which now housed his shop and went to the door. Yeah, he called back. Just a second. He came back to where Henry was sitting. That stuff of yours ready to go? No, I've got a couple more hours of work yet. I'll stick it in an overnight envelope tomorrow on our way out. Okay. Kane went to his shipping bench where he picked up 2 long boxes, a square box, and his UPS shipping record book. He carried these out to the waiting truck and returned in less than a minute. UPS come here every day? Henry asked. Alan Kane's house in southern Indiana was about 40 miles from the Kentucky border and was situated amid lots of farmland. They charge any extra? No, standard weekly rate, just like for an office building in Indianapolis. Yeah, same with me, but I'm not quite this far out in the sticks. Always surprises me all these overnight guys can give people like us the same service and still make money. What'd you just ship out? Henry asked, changing the subject. The night vision stuff, of course. Shame it won't take it on a real gun, Kane observed. Alan and Henry had mounted one of the 2 prototype units on a single shot, 50 caliber rifle the previous evening, and the image intensifier had broken after 160 rounds. Also a new-in-the-box M16 I nicked a guy 3,500 for. Guy went nuts when he found out I had one hadn't been touched since '83, and a bar that I rewadded for Stembridge. Henry nodded. Stembridge Gun Rentals in Hollywood was the largest and oldest supplier of correct period weapons to filmmakers, and they relied heavily on Alan Kane and his unparalleled ability to restore old, incomplete machine guns and make them function better than they did when they were new. The bar had been a registered DeWatt, with the chamber plugged and welded and the bolt welded open. Alan Kane had applied to reactivate the gun, then machined out the welds, replaced the bolt and barrel, fitted the correct bipod and flash hider for the period that the weapon had been manufactured, reparkerized the metal, and refinished the wood. It was one of his least involved restoration jobs. "You doing any cheap DSHKs for them to rent to Stallone?" Henry asked with a grin. "Fuck you," Alan replied good-naturedly. Henry had repeated a standing joke among NFA weapons dealers and manufacturers, and it was one that he himself had created. The makers of modern action war movies prided themselves on their attention to detail regarding the weapons used in their films. NFA weapons experts such as Henry and Alan could forgive artistic license, as when one of the characters in Predator fired long bursts from the hip out of a hand-carried GE minigun fed from a backpack. They also understood that allowances had to be made if a movie included scenes involving weaponry of which no single remaining example existed. They drew the line, however, when big-budget films with well-known stars showed weaponry that was absolutely wrong for the scene. The example that had made NFA dealers howl was Rambo 3, a 1987 movie set in Afghanistan. Russian heavy machine gun which the Soviets were using against the Mujahideen was, of course, the 12.7 mm DSK, which had been put into service in the USSR in 1938. The gun had been revised slightly in 1946, and though the guns were rare in the U.S., several good examples were present at every Knob Creek shoot. Henry and Alan each owned both a 1938 and a 1946 model. The guns weighed well over 100 pounds without the mount, and fired a cartridge similar to but slightly larger than the U.S. .50 Browning. The movie makers, however, had not used DSKs in the film. Instead, Rambo III had depicted Russian soldiers firing 30 caliber USM 60 machine guns, weight 25 pounds, fitted with dummy barrel shrouds, crudely fashioned to resemble the silhouette of the 12.7 mm DSHK. Henry Bowman had immediately spread the rumor, utterly false, that it was Alan Kane who had effected the makeover and convinced the producers that no one would know the difference. Henry was amazed at the number of otherwise intelligent people who still believed this story, and Alan Kane still got razzed about it. "You still doing a lot of business with Stembridge?" Henry asked. "More than ever," Kane said immediately. "They really got fucked in '86. The 1986 ban had made it impossible for the studios or their designees to legally manufacture full auto weaponry from scratch or from semi-auto variants, as the Hollywood entities were not government or police agencies. Some of the studios are just ignoring the law entirely now," Kane went on. "Tim says they're hiring machinists to set up on site and manufacture machine guns for the duration of filming, then cut them up after all the gun scenes are done." "Damn, aren't they worried some Fed will want to make a name for himself?" "You'd think so, but they got so much money they can probably buy off anyone. Anyway, it's not everyone doing it that way. Stembridge has been calling me all the time for stuff lately." Alan looked over at Henry. "You about ready for lunch? I was going to go in the house and throw something together." "Yeah, let me work on this a little longer. 20, 30 minutes, say?" "You got it." Kane left the shop and walked towards the house. Henry Bowman sat up in the straight-backed wooden chair and turned his attention back to the papers and yellow legal pad. He had been using one of Alan Kane's loading benches as a desk ever since he had arrived. So far, Henry had spent more time with a pen than with the keyboard of his computer. He was almost done with his assessment of a 3D geologic imaging process that his stockbroker had asked him to evaluate. The process was one patented by a small company, Petromag, whose stock was followed by only a handful of analysts. Henry's broker, who was always looking for companies that would grow faster than the economy as a whole, had picked up on it. Petromag's proprietary technique involved spatial analysis of below-ground sound waves to determine the location of oil deposits. The company hired out its technicians to drilling companies for an upfront fee and a percentage of the future revenues of any wells that were drilled based on data generated by Petromag. The company also had a small oil company which was a wholly owned subsidiary. This oil company had drilled 17 exploratory wells in the past 2 years. Only 3 of them had been dry holes. Henry's broker had explained that such results could still be due to luck, and wanted an impartial opinion as to whether the new process might possibly be as superior as the company claimed. The discovery that the broker had made was that the firm maintained a library of all the geologic data they had analyzed using their 3D imaging process, but for accounting purposes they were assigning a 5-year life to each set of data. Unless the maps were no good whatsoever, They would be valuable for an indefinite period of time, for the oil was not going anywhere. Thus, if the process worked at all, the current price of the stock did not reflect the true value of the company's 3D map library. Henry reached over to the battery charger sitting at the back of the bench and retrieved the cellular phone he had brought from Missouri. Alan Kane didn't like to be interrupted while he was working on guns, and he did not have a phone in his workshop. If he had, Henry would probably still have used his own cellular unit, as he did not generally use other people's things when his own were available. He folded out the mouthpiece, hit the power button, and tapped in the number. Bartram Meeks. Yeah, Tina, this is Henry Bowman. Is Mitt there? Just a moment. Hey, Henry, where are you? I've been trying to get hold of you for 2 days now. I'm over at a friend's house right now. I've been studying the dope you sent me on Petromag. Yeah, that's what I've been trying to call you about. Look, bottom line, Henry broke in, I think the guys at Petromag are onto something. It may not be as vastly superior to previous technology as they claim, but it does look like an improvement over prior art. Put it this way. In organic chemistry final exams, college professors write down the beginning compounds and ending compounds, and ask you to write down all the intervening chemical reactions. When you don't know the answer and make something up that you think sounds plausible, they like to take a big red marker and write "magic" in big letters on that part of your exam book. From what I can see, if these guys submitted the explanations you got for me to the appropriate professor, I don't think he'd get out his red pen. Nothing in the technical description is of the lead into gold type of science. That's the best I can do with what you sent, okay? Well, that's good news, but you're not finished. Petromag just announced a new addition to their process that they says gets rid of some of the false positives they were getting. Talked to their chief engineer yesterday, and he sent me a bunch more scans I want you to look at. Hell, Mitt, I'm about to go on vacation, Henry said plaintively. Even as he uttered the words, Henry Bowman knew he would find some way to do what his broker wanted. Stuart Mittendorfer was very thorough in performing his own analysis, and he used any experts he could to get at the truth. His recommendations had tripled the value of Henry Bowman's portfolio over the last 8 years. He was particularly good at judging when it was time to get out of a stock. Mitt did not answer, and Henry knew that he could hold the phone for 10 minutes and the broker would not speak until Henry broke the silence. Okay, I admit it, Henry said. You got me really interested. How soon do I have to look at this new stuff? Yesterday? Pretty much. This thing might pop any day now. Nobody follows this company right now, but... He left the rest of the sentence unfinished. Let me call you back in an hour or so, Henry sighed. I need to get my other messages first. Your recorder wasn't turned on the last few times I tried to reach you, the broker said. And you didn't have your cellular on either. That's why I was going nuts. Damn, Henry thought. I did forget to turn on the recorder before I left. He began to mentally review who he needed to talk to before rendering himself incommunicado for 2 to 3 weeks. You going to be in the office for the next hour or two? Henry asked. All day. Let me call you back. Henry thought a moment, then reconsidered. Nan, screw that. How many pages is this stuff? 6, I think, is what I've got right now. There's more coming, but it won't get here till tomorrow. Sometime before 10:30. Okay, anything oversized, stick on your copier and reduce it to letter size, then fax everything you've got so far to my cellular number. I'll hook it into my laptop as soon as I hang up here. If any seismic charts or stuff like that are too hard to read, I can have you send me the originals overnight mail if I have to. If your fax doesn't go through right away, keep sending. I'll be using the phone while you're using your copier, and you may finish before I do. Good deal, the broker said with obvious relief in his voice. Henry disconnected and began to dial his home number to confirm that he really had failed to turn on his phone recorder before making his other calls. Change of plans, Alan, Henry said with a very embarrassed look on his face as he came in for lunch, and I feel like a real dick brain. Well, that's understandable, Kane replied with a smile. Alan motioned to Henry to help himself to one of the thick hamburgers Alan had cooked. What's the problem? 2 things have come up, Henry said as he filled a glass with water from the tap and ignored the dig. I've been doing analysis on a seismic process being used by an oil services company, and I just found out that I need to do some more. I could blow it off, but I've already done most of the work, and I think I'm going to end up buying a big chunk of stock for myself, so I want to finish up. Probably take me another day. I can wait an extra day, Alan said immediately. Hey, you like spicy food? Put a little slice of one of these on that, Kane said as he handed Henry a red pepper about the size of a .458 bullet. But just a little bitty slice. I mean like half the size of a grain of rice. That's a habanero. A friend of mine has a garden where he grows nothing but peppers. He says that's the hottest one in the world. Henry gave his friend a dubious look, pulled his knife from his pocket, and flicked open the double-edged blade with one hand. An Applegate? Alan Kane asked, eyeing the metal satin finish and the two names laser engraved on it. Right. Leave it to Colonel Rex to design a pocket knife that'll get you arrested in 43 states, he joked. Henry was referring to the fact that the knife he was holding was designed to be opened with one hand, and its blade was double-edged, a feature almost unheard of in a folder. On the market since 1996, Henry's knife was the last blade designed by Colonel Rex Applegate, the fullback-sized ex-OSS officer who had been assigned to train Americans in close-quarter battle in World War II. Applegate had taken his wartime job to heart and had seen no reason to slack off on his efforts merely because the Second World War ended. Applegate continued to train people until his death in August of 1998. Colonel Rex had been one of Henry and Alan's favorite people. Last time I saw him was in early '98, about 6 months before he died. He was signing a copy of Kill or Get Killed for a friend of mine. Had some big gold coin on a choker, looked like it weighed a couple ounces. You know why he wore that, don't you? Henry asked as he sliced a small piece off the pepper and put it on the edge of his hamburger. It was to bait the street punks into trying to mug him, to keep in practice. Some moron outside the SHOT Show back in '96 thought a guy in his 80s with a bad limp would be easy pickings, Henry continued as he prepared to bite into his sandwich. He ended up on the ground screaming like a woman with the sorest set of "Jesus Christ!" Henry exclaimed around a mouthful of food. Don't say I didn't warn you, Alan Kane said, and then became utterly overcome with laughter at Henry's facial expressions. Too hot for you? He finally asked. No, Henry said, swallowing, but you weren't kidding about how much to use. I guess that's why you never see these things in the supermarket. Not too much profit margin when one of them is enough for 1,000 people. Henry judiciously sliced 4 even tinier pieces off the habanero and arranged them on the rest of his hamburger. He took a long drink of water and eyed his sandwich cautiously before taking another, smaller bite. What one was saying earlier, he continued, getting back to his change of plans. Remember I was telling you about that refueling company I capitalized? Wasn't that the deal where your fuel trucks would go fill up semis at night that were operated by union drivers and charge the company double for the fuel? Something about when it was after hours and the union's depot was closed, the unions wouldn't let their drivers fill their own trucks at a self-service. Yeah, that's the one, except the drivers weren't completely prohibited from self-service, but it was such a horrendous extra charge that our setup was cheaper. Anyway, we locked one truck line into a 5-year contract less than 3 years ago, and now the drivers' union has gotten hungry and changed their policy, and the truck line wants out of their contract with my guy. They just read the fine print on the contract and went ballistic. Hack Carter, that's the president of the refueling company, just had his tires slashed and started getting death threats. Jesus, that's just what you need. Oh, it's not quite that bad, Henry said as he gingerly took another bite from his hamburger. I don't have any active role in managing the company, and I think I can handle it with a phone call to a fellow I know, if I can ever get through to him. He seems to be away from his office, too. Henry then drained his water glass and went to the sink to refill it. So you telling me you're out for Idaho? Hell no, not that. What it looks like, though, is that this crap might take more than a day or two. I wasn't planning to go for a full month anyway. What say we flip it around? I'll come out 10 days late instead of leaving 10 days early. What about your guns? And how are you going to get from a major airport to wherever I happen to be 10 days from now? I thought about that. Since you're bringing the belt feds and the 20 millimeters, all I've got is a half dozen wheel guns, 3 bolt action rifles, and a bar. They'll fit in my Cub, no problem. I'll check my charts, but there's apt to be a local airport or a duster strip within 10 miles of anywhere you're likely to be camped. Henry paused, and he could see Alan was considering the idea. Would you be able to do your stuff from here for a few days before going back to Missouri? Alan asked. I guess I could, Henry said with a puzzled expression. Why? While you were out in the shop working, Dale Price called. You've met him. He's the hog farmer, lives about 5 miles west of here, likes big caliber single shots. The guy with the 577 built on a fix action wanted to see my 4-bore. Yeah, that's the guy. Anyway, he was supposed to come by tonight and pick up Eugene, take care of him till I got back. Kane said, scratching the dog behind his ears. He just called from Pennsylvania, said could I leave him tied up with plenty of food or water and he'd be by in a couple days. No way I'm going to do that, but I don't have anyone else I can leave him with. I'll stay here a couple days, work on the Petromag stuff, and when I have to go, if Dale hasn't shown up yet, I'll take Eugene back to Missouri with me. Alan Kane laughed. On a motorcycle? Of course. I'll bolt a wooden box with the top open to the luggage rack. He'll love it. You know, this may actually work out okay, Alan said, thinking. What about your ammo? Where is it? All my ammo's inside the door to the garage, ready to throw on your truck if you still don't mind stopping by the house and picking it up. I can give you my alarm codes. Sure, no problem. Then let's plan on meeting in Mackey 10 days from today, Henry suggested. That's where Lindbergh Truck Lines is, remember? Where we used to buy our dynamite. 10 days should be plenty of time for me to clear up this newest headache. Let's just plan on meeting at Lindbergh's June 14th, 10 days from today. When you're near a phone a day or two before, give him a call. If some disaster hits and I can't make it, I'll phone them and leave a message. Give him a call on the 12th. If I haven't called in to cancel, I'll be there. That sound good? Yeah, that'll work, Alan replied. And after lunch you can help me load the deuce and a half. Somehow I had a feeling you were going to get around to that. June 7th. Gentlemen, the supervisor said. Ladies, he added, nodding to acknowledge the two women agents present in the briefing room. I can't stress strongly enough the importance of the mission you are about to carry out. A successful, three-pronged raid will break the back of the largest obstacle to our authority and ability to do our jobs, independent Class 3 manufacturers. Wilson Blair wasn't telling his people anything he hadn't said before, but he was a strong believer in the benefits of a final pep talk before an important raid. Between them, Grant Millett and Alan Kane account for almost one-third of the annual dealer-to-dealer transfers of NFA weapons in this country. Nailing both these guys at the same time will be the death knell for all the people in this country who think that just because they get a bunch of federal licenses and pay a bunch of taxes, they have the right to manufacture and own guns that should properly be restricted to the government. Together, Kane and Millett have over 2,000 machine guns and destructive devices registered to them. I guarantee that the haul you take from those two places is going to be plastered on the front pages of every newspaper in this country, he said. And this time, there'll be no goddamn disasters like we got back in '93, he added silently. Henry Bowman is not a manufacturer like Kane and Millett, and compared to those two, his Class 3 business is tiny. He is nonetheless the third largest NFA weapons dealer in Missouri, and you'll still get a great photo opportunity with what you'll find at his place. According to the current NFA registry, Bowman has over 100 Title II weapons registered to him. Henry Bowman's great importance to this raid is that he is a lifelong friend of Alan Kane's and is also close to Grant Millett. As such, we can safely assume that he knows as much or more about Kane and Millett than anyone else in the country. He is also a wealthy man who has considerable assets other than his firearms inventory. Kane and Millett have only their guns to lose, Blair said airily. He was ignoring any concepts of personal freedom or dignity, but none of the agents in the room noticed. Because of that, he went on, we have less to trade with the two of them. Bowman, however, has several $1 million in securities and real estate, in addition to his guns. Further, he has never held a manufacturer's license. He has a lot smaller stake in the gun end of things, and a lot more to lose overall than his two friends. It is Bowman that we believe we can get to roll over and hand us Kane and Millett, and hitting all three of them at the same time is the way to do it. Bowman is currently en route, spending 3 weeks in the Idaho Rockies with Kane. Our surveillance has confirmed that Kane's 2.5-ton military truck left Indiana 2 days ago and was seen in Wyoming this morning. Their destination is somewhere in the Possumoroy Valley in central Idaho. They should soon be there, if they are not already. That is some 1,800 miles away from Kane's house and 1,500 miles from Bowman's. They are camping out of their vehicle, and their exact location is unknown, not only to us but to anyone. That gives us a great advantage, for it means that no message can reach them for a minimum of several days and perhaps as long as several weeks. Similarly, Millett is currently in Ecuador. He is halfway through a 3-week trip to Central and South America where he is looking for surplus tripods, optics, and gun parts for future importation. As with Bowman and Kane, Millett's exact schedule is unknown to anyone, and the fact that he on a different continent makes it a certainty that by the time he learns of our actions, we will have an airtight case against him. Bowman is single, and at the moment he lives alone. Kane has been separated from his wife for almost a year. She lives with another man in Indianapolis, and their 2 children are grown and live out of state. Millet's wife and their 3 children are at the present time in Orlando, Florida, and will soon be visiting Disney World, where Millet will meet them on his way home to Ohio. The supervisor smiled broadly. None of the 3 targets' houses are occupied at this time. We have an opportunity here, people, the supervisor said emphatically, like we have never had before. This one's going to finally make up for all the screw-ups that have gone before, he added to himself. We are going to nail these 3 bastards, and we are going to have them up on a list of charges 3 feet long before they even know they've been raided. Henry Bowman was sitting in an armchair next to the loading bench. He had turned out the lights and was sitting in the dark thinking about the most recent facts concerning Petromag when his cellular phone rang. He looked at his watch, 11:17 p. I hope it's Sam. Sam Ashton was a private investigator and skip tracer who brought back bail jumpers for bail bondsmen. With the possible exception of Earl Taylor Edgerton, Sam was the first person Henry would choose to have on his side in a fight where he was greatly outnumbered. Hello? Yeah, man, what do you need? Sam, Henry exclaimed. Thanks for calling me back. Listen, I'm out of town and I've got a problem. St. Louis Company. I've got some money in named on-site refueling out near the airport off of Dunn Road. They've got a long-standing contract with a truck line, and now the Union D Rivers are pissed and want on-site to tear it up. On-site's president's name is Hack Carter, and he's had his tires slashed and some death threats on the phone. That was when I talked to him a couple days ago. Maybe more shit's happened by now. Here's his home number, Henry continued, and recited an exchange in Bridgeton. As he finished repeating the number, Henry heard Eugene barking loudly outside. Hope that's Dale Price, he thought. Sam, there's someone just pulled up, so I'll have to call you back. But can you talk to Hack for me and maybe help him out? He's been going kind of nuts. Sam Ashton laughed in reply. The way you sounded on the recorder, I thought this was going to be something difficult. I've got to leave town in 2 days, but those union bosses are all so dirty, first-time investigator could fill up a legal pad by then. Give me a day, and your guy won't have any more trouble. Probably won't run you over 500. Eugene was barking more frantically now, and Henry heard what sounded like several voices at the far edge of the yard. Sounds great. I'm sure Hack'll jump at that deal. What the hell's going on out there? Henry wondered as he stood up. Sam, let me call you back. Somebody just drove up, and I've got to see who it is. Don't bother. I won't be here. I got all the info I need. This time tomorrow the problem will be solved. Bye. Sam Ashton hung up. Henry Bowman pushed the end button on his cellular phone and reached out in the darkness for the doorway to Alan Kane's lead casting room. His hand found the edge of the doorframe and he slid his fingers along the loading workshop wall to where he knew the light switch lay. Henry's fingertips had just touched the switch plate when he heard a most distinctive noise, and Eugene suddenly fell silent. Henry Bowman felt the hair on his back stand on end, and his hand instinctively went to the 5N frame in the sharkskin Ken Null holster at his right kidney. There's only 2 things I know of that make that sound, he thought to himself, as he pulled his hand away from the light switch, and one of them requires a constant source of compressed air. Somehow I doubt that whoever's out there just happens to have an air tank and a pneumatic nail gun, and I don't think Eugene just happened to get tired of barking. Henry knew that Kane's pet was almost certainly dead. He forced his mind to focus on preserving his own life instead of mourning the dog. Need to be able to see first, Henry said to himself, thinking of the 2 latest design night scopes that Alan had shipped back 3 days earlier. Goggles, it'd be best. He walked silently in the darkness towards the other end of the room. There was enough moonlight coming in through the curtains for Henry to see the larger things in the crowded shop, but he shuffled his feet and extended his arms to avoid crashing into anything smaller and causing a racket. The 8 night vision devices that Alan and Henry had used as a comparison with the ones sent by the SEAL team were on the shelf next to a box set of collets for Alan's milling machine. Henry felt around until his hands recognized the familiar shape of the ANTV S5 dual-tube night vision goggles, then he lifted them off the shelf and slipped them on his head. The newer generation TVS7 single-tube version was newer and supposedly better, but Henry wanted the -5 for 2 reasons. First, Henry owned a pair of TVS5s, and so was familiar with the layout of their controls. Second, Alan had been the last one to use the -7 in their comparison, while Henry had been the last person to wear the -5. Henry knew the dual-tube unit was already adjusted for his head and eyes. Henry Bowman pulled off the lens caps and switched on the power. He was rewarded with a blurred green video image of Alan Kane's shop.
Focus is set at infinity, he realized with satisfaction. Now for some ears.
He took one of the amplified headsets off a hook on the wall, put them on his head over the NV goggle harness, switched them on, and turned up the gain. Henry Bowman pulled off the lens caps and switched on the power. He was rewarded with a blurred green video image of Alan Kane's shop.
Focus is set at infinity, he realized with satisfaction. Now for some ears.
He took one of the amplified headsets off a hook on the wall, put them on his head over the NV goggle harness, switched them on, and turned up the gain. Only then did Henry draw his Smith and make his way to the large sliding doors that separated him from Alan Kane's yard. "Should one or two of us go check the storage buildings?" Ralph Compton asked as he nudged the carcass of Alan Kane's dog with the toe of his boot. He was mentally congratulating himself on the chest shot he had made from 10 feet. The 140, 7-grain, 9mm slug from Compton's suppressed HNK MP5 had killed the dog instantly. "No, won't take us but a minute to get in here. After we've had a look around the main house, then we can all spread out and check the rest of the property." Alan Kane's 2-acre plot contained his house, the barn he had turned into a shop, 2 sheds he used for storing tripods and heavy mounts, an old blacksmith shop where he kept his lead ingots and .50 caliber burnouts, and 2 modern-era steel buildings, one where he stored all his belts and magazines, and the other full of smokeless powder for reloading. His guns were kept in safes inside an underground vault, accessible only from the house. Henry Bowman stood a few feet back from the gap between the sliding doors and looked out into the night towards the house. What he saw filled him with dismay. A white van was parked on the gravel to the side of Kane's house. And shit, there's 6 of them, he said to himself after counting heads. At least 6, he corrected, when he realized there could be more men out of sight. No night vision gear, and they drove right up by the back door of the house. They know where the guns are and they think the place is deserted. Henry saw Eugene lying dead by the back porch and saw the unmistakable shape of a suppressed MP5. 6 guys with MP5s, he thought in utter horror. Suddenly the Smith & Wesson in his right hand felt about as potent as a muzzleloader. Gotta find something better, Henry thought frantically as he looked around the shop. The green image was blurred at the close distance, and Henry reached up and focused the image tubes for an 8-foot distance and turned on the tiny IR bulb which lit up the video screen like a floodlight. Alan Kane kept almost all of his guns in his vault, except when he was working on them or shooting them. There were usually 1 or 2 lying around the shop, but Alan had left for Idaho, and the only gun Henry could remember being out was a .22 pistol Henry had been shooting the day before. It was a high-standard Olympic in. 22 short, loaded with CB caps. CB caps were 22 seconds loaded with a light 29-grain bullet and a tiny amount of powder. Their velocity was well under the speed of sound, and close up, they would penetrate only about 3/4 into a pine 2x4. They also made very little noise. Alan kept the gun and the pipsqueak loads around to shoot mice. Better than nothing, Henry thought as he hurried to the cleaning table where he had left the high standard. The bolt was locked back on an empty magazine, but there were 4 loaded ones next to it that Henry had not yet gotten around to shooting. He swapped the empty magazine and the gun for a full one, put the remaining 3 loaded magazines in his left pocket, and continued to look around the shop. Didn't Alan have a Garand up here, he thought before remembering his friend had taken it with him in the truck. Then Henry spotted the one other gun in the room, a rifle standing in the corner behind the drill press. "Mag's missing," Henry observed, and almost left it where it was. Then he realized it would be foolish to do so. "At least I've got ammo for it," he thought sardonically as he grabbed the rifle and returned to his vantage point by the sliding door. The electronics in his muffs magnified the sounds of his footsteps and made him wince. "Door looks pretty solid, sir," Peter Hagedorn said, shining his flashlight around its perimeter. "GG, grab the shotgun out of the van," Wilson Blair commanded, and one of the agents immediately hurried towards the white Ford. G.G. Jackson was one of many women employed by agencies of the federal government. She had been born in Chicago's South Side in 1963. Her mother, Shavonna Jackson, had been 15 at the time. Like many 15-year-old single mothers, Shavonna Jackson had not thought much about the realities of motherhood, including the immediate problem of what to name her offspring. Concurrently, overworked interns on rotation in ghetto hospitals did what they could to entertain themselves amid 20-hour days in depressing surroundings. In 1963, as in all other years, one of the standard gambits among interns assigned to inner-city delivery rooms was to see who could cause the most outrageous name to be printed on the birth certificate of children born to ghetto teenagers. The second week of February 1963 saw some serious competition among interns in South Chicago. In a 5-day period, there were Chicago area births registered for Madison Avenue, Washington, Epluribus Wilson, Nosmo King, inspired by a waiting room sign, Simeon Cook, and Enos Brown. The award that week, however, went to a young doctor from Grosse Pointe, Michigan, who hated working in the Chicago facility. He had suggested to Miss Jackson that she give her infant daughter a distinctive, happy-sounding name and offered one he thought appropriate. He pronounced the first name with the accent on the second syllable, and Shavonna thought it sounded nice, like Gloria, only fancier. People who read the name would pronounce it differently, but Shavonna could not read, so the impact of the intern's joke was not felt for some time. When Shavonna learned the truth 2 years later, she started addressing her daughter by her first and middle initials, and the Jackson girl grew up pretending she was named for a pretty lady in a movie. To this day, Gigi Jackson was unaware of what was actually typed on her birth certificate. Henry Bowman had been making his way to the sliding barn doors and had not heard Wilson Blair call Agent Jackson by her first name. That pudgy black guy runs like a girl, Henry thought, as he watched the intruder jog back to the van. The reflection of the flashlight on the back door of Alan Kane's house made it look like green daylight in Henry's night vision goggles. Although the goggles offered no magnification, Henry could make out a number of details at the 60-yard distance. He reached in his left pocket, withdrew one of the 10-shot magazines for the high standard, .22 pistol, and began to unload it so that he would have ammo for the rifle. Henry analyzed the weapons he faced as he put the 10 cartridges in his mouth. White guy with the MP5, tall black guy with an AR-15 or M16, probably a -16 if they've got a suppressed HNK. White guy with an attaché case not wearing a hat like the others seems to be giving the orders. Probably H has a pistol under his coat. White guy with a flashlight and a pistol in a belt holster. Small guy, girl maybe, standing off to the left, also with a belt holster. Fat black guy coming back from the van with a thin padded case, not wide enough to hold a scoped rifle, no holster visible on this side. Maybe he's a lefty. A multi-gender and multi-racial assault force armed with automatic weapons and invading Alan Kane's home in the middle of the night meant only one thing to Henry Bowman. Some kind of terrorist organization looking to outfit their troops, Henry decided as he stared at the 6 intruders. Possibly a drug ring. Outlaw motorcycle gang? He thought briefly. No, not with 2 black guys, and the hair's too short. What's that guy got in the briefcase? Burglary tools? Henry thought a moment about the timing of the assault. Probably found out at a gun show when Alan had been gone, likely from out of state. Probably California. Alan Kane set up at gun shows from California to Florida to advertise his business. California state law prohibited private ownership of machine guns and banned the sale of most semi-autos, but Kane did a large business with the movie studios and the rental companies that served them. Henry scanned the area to the sides as far as his vantage point would permit, but saw no other people. Alan's storage vault is better than the local banks, but you can get into anything if you have enough time. Van's probably full of equipment. They've got all the time in the world, and they'll kill me if I try to make a run for it. He considered using his cellular to call the local sheriff. Out here in the middle of a bunch of farmland, probably only have 1 cruiser to send. With a couple deputies, they'll have to roust out of bed. God knows how long that would take, and then these guys would cut them to ribbons before they got out of the car. Henry came to a decision. It's time to take the advice you've been giving people for over 20 years, fella. Strike back when you're strong and still have your wits about you and the enemy isn't expecting it. Give 'em your teeth, not your belly. Henry's mind went into overdrive, trying to determine how to mount an effective defense against the 6 invaders. A plan was beginning to take shape, and Henry Bowman was completely focused on how to stop all 6 terrorists and stay alive in the process. One of the white men was removing a gun from the case that the other had brought from the van, and Henry saw it was a long-barreled Remington 870 12-gauge. Doorbuster, Henry thought. He immediately knew what was going to happen next, and he had an idea of how to make it work for him. Henry Bowman stripped the amplified earmuffs and the night vision goggles off his head, laid the goggles on top of a turret lathe to his left, and replaced the muffs. The high standard was tucked in his pants with the bolt still back. Henry ignored it and picked up the rifle he had brought from the far end of the shop. It was a Remington Model 37, .22, a boy's target rifle made in 1946. The magazine was missing, and to load the rifle, Henry had to angle it downwards, take a cartridge out of his mouth, and manually insert the round into the breech without letting it fall into the magazine cutout. He took a step backwards, leaned against the turret lathe to make his position even more steady, and raised the .22 rifle to check his sight picture. The flashlight beam on the back door put all 6 of the intruders in stark silhouette. "Prop the screen door open with something," Agent Peter Hagedorn said as he looked at the main door to Kane's house. "You don't want to be standing there holding it." Agent Elena Martinez spotted a 5-gallon bucket in the yard and went to get it. As she did, Hagedorn examined the edge of the door carefully to determine exactly where he was going to shoot. Henry Bowman lowered the rifle and took a step back. He put his finger in his mouth and rearranged 3 of the .22 rounds so they poked out between his lips, rims facing out. As he raised the gun, 5 of the 6 intruders backed up several steps away from the door. All but the white man with the .870 and the black man holding the M16 put their fingers in their ears. The man with the suppressed HNK submachine gun let the weapon dangle on its sling as he held his ears. One of the others held the flashlight trained on the left side of the door with one hand and covered one ear with the other. From 3 feet inside the barn, Henry Bowman took careful aim at the man holding the M16 and placed the white bead of the front sight on the base of the man's skull. He squeezed the trigger with about a pound of pressure, which was as hard as he dared, and waited. Peter Hagedorn raised the .870 to his shoulder. From a distance of about 4 feet, he took aim at the spot on the door that concealed the lower hinge and pulled the trigger. As flame leaped out of the shotgun barrel and the slug slammed into the lower left edge of the hardwood door, Henry's finger tightened involuntarily on the Model 37's trigger, and the gun fired. .22 CB caps, such as the ones Henry had removed from the High Standards magazine and put in his mouth, are loaded to a velocity of about 800 feet per second. This is less than the speed of sound. Any bullet traveling below the speed of sound makes no sonic crack as it passes through the air. The only real noise is the muzzle blast, which is why subsonic ammunition is preferred for suppressed weapons. A .22 CB cap, however, only uses about 1/1000th of an ounce of propellant, which is completely consumed in the first 10 of barrel. When fired in a bolt-action rifle with a barrel 24 long, A .22 CB cap round makes a trivial amount of noise compared to a 12-gauge shotgun. The report of Henry's single shot, fired from inside the barn, was inaudible. It was completely drowned out by the muzzle blast of the .870, the echoes of that muzzle blast bouncing off the barn, and the sound of the 1-ounce slug tearing through the wood door and impacting the steel hinge on the other side. Henry Bowman had already flicked the bolt open and ejected the fired case by the time the echoes of the larger gun had died out. He plucked a second round out from between his lips, bent forward sharply at the waist, and pushed the cartridge into the chamber without dropping the butt from his shoulder. As he prepared for his second shot, Henry's vision registered that his first target was down and that the shotgun man was taking aim again. He put the front sight on a spot behind the ear of the man with the MP5, tightened his trigger finger, and held his breath. The 5 spectators had been watching the illuminated spot on the door, and Elena Martinez was the only one of the 5 who noticed Agent LeVar Williams fall down. She logically assumed he had been struck with a slug fragment. "Hey, I think LeVar got," she started to say, but Agent Hagedorn was concentrating on his aim and his ears were ringing. The second blast of his shotgun cut off the rest of what Martinez was trying to tell them. This time, Agent Compton collapsed. "Hagedorn!" Agent Martinez screamed. "Stop shooting! Williams and Compton are hurt. I think your slugs are ricocheting. They may be hurt bad." This time the man heard her, and he lowered his shotgun and started to turn towards the other agents. Agent G.G. Jackson was shining the light on the corpse of LeVar Williams, and Elena Martinez was still screaming about ricochets when Henry Bowman's third shot hit Peter Hagedorn a half-inch to the left of the bridge of his nose. The human mind can only process a finite amount of information in a given amount of time. When the brain is expecting to receive one set of inputs and gets something entirely different, the process takes several times longer. Supervisory Agent Blair and Agent Jackson had been watching their companion fire a shotgun at the door of a house whose owner was known to be almost 2,000 miles away. They had been fully expecting to see the door sag on its remaining hinge. Instead, Blair and Jackson found themselves staring at 2 bodies on the ground and listening, with ringing ears from 2 shotgun blasts, to Agent Martinez screaming about ricochets. When their minds had grasped the fact that 2 of their men were hurt, their brains were overwhelmed with the new data, and the common phenomena of auditory exclusion under stress occurred. Neither Wilson Blair, G.G. Jackson, nor the nearly hysterical Elena Martinez had been able to hear the first 2 soft sounds from the direction of the barn. With Martinez's increasing volume, the jarring sight of the 2 men on the ground, and the onset of auditory exclusion, They did not notice the third. As Agents Blair, Jackson, and Martinez stared open-mouthed, Agent Hagedorn dropped the Remington 870 pump gun on the concrete pad just outside the back door to the house and collapsed on top of it. The three agents who were still on their feet looked around wildly, but it was dark, and their night vision was non-existent from staring at a white door illuminated by a flashlight. "Weapons out," Blair finally yelled as he dropped his briefcase and drew his 9mm Beretta. He was about to give the command to run for the cover of the vehicle when night turned into day. Henry Bowman had switched on all 4 of the halogen spotlights mounted on the roof of the barn. The 3 ATF agents that were still functioning stood frozen in the blinding light. "Drop your weapons!" Henry Bowman yelled as he drew his .544 Magnum and cocked it as he brought it to bear on the center figure. His voice was loud enough that it activated the circuitry in his hearing protectors, shutting off the amplifier. Henry's words sounded muffled to him. Then the electronics cut back in and the night sounds were once again amplified. The 3 intruders squinted in the bright light, and Henry saw that the pudgy black one was female. She was the only one of the 3 who obeyed Henry's command. The other 2 still gripped their 9mm Berettas. The man was holding his hand out in front of his face as if to shield his eyes from the light. With his amplified earmuffs, Henry heard the man whisper to the 2 women. "On my signal, we break for cover," Wilson Blair instructed softly. "Martinez, you go for the van. Jackson, you get around the side of the house." Henry Bowman heard the command in his amplified earmuffs, saw the 2 women turn their heads reflexively towards their superior, and made a quick decision. "It's still 3-1. They split up, they can get me in a whipsaw. The leader's the one I want to talk to." He took aim on the woman nearest the van, put the front sight of his end frame on the hinge of her jaw, and squeezed the trigger. Gigi Jackson watched in horror as Elena Martinez's head seemed to burst, and the black woman's bladder let go involuntarily. Wilson Blair, who had been steeling himself to give the command to run, flinched at the sound of the high-powered revolver discharging 60 yards away. He heard the sickening thwack of the bullet striking home, and at the edge of his vision he saw Martinez's body collapse in the grass. Blair let go of his Beretta as if it were radioactive. It fell next to his briefcase. "Much better," Henry Bowman yelled. "Now both of you, hands on top of your heads. Good. Now turn around and face the house." Blair and Jackson obeyed. Against the floodlit back wall of Alan Kane's house, the 2 agents saw the shadow of one man approaching with a pistol in his left hand and a bag of some sort in his right. Wilson Blair found his voice. "We are agents of the United States government," he said, his words wavering at first, then beginning to gain strength. "Yeah, right," Henry thought when he heard the man's claim. "And I'm Santa Claus." He looked at the body nearest him. The black man's eye was open, and a trickle of blood ran from the base of his skull where Henry's first round had struck its mark. "The Treasury Department, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms," Blair continued. What a moron, Henry thought immediately. If you were going to pretend to be a cop, pretend to be a real one. Henry had left his amplified hearing protectors in the shop. He held his 5 Smith in his left hand as he stood 20 feet from the 2 invaders. The barrel of the high standard, .22, was in the right pocket of his blue jeans, with the gun's action and grip protruding. The pistol had a round in the chamber and the safety was on. "Keep your hands on top of your heads and turn around slowly." The white man and the black woman did as they were instructed. Henry Bowman was a dark silhouette standing between them and the bright lights. Henry glanced at the 4 bodies on the ground. The man with the M16 was a clean kill, and the woman he had headshot with his .44 was obviously dead also. But I can't see any blood on the shotgun guy, and he and the MP5 guy are both lying on top of their weapons. He considered the 2 sprawled forms that might still be alive. Shotgun's the biggest threat, Henry decided. Then the MP5. He saw that the man who was staring down the muzzle of his Smith was licking his lips, getting up the nerve to speak. "I am Supervisory Agent Wilson Blair of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms," Blair said as Henry dropped the canvas bag and drew the high standard. "And I demand that you—" Blair stopped in mid-sentence as Henry Bowman pulled the trigger on the .22 and sent a bullet into the center of the crown of Peter Hagedorn's face-down corpse. The gun spat like a loud air rifle. Before it registered on Blair what had happened, Henry had swung the muzzle onto his second target. The inert form of Ralph Compton was no longer inert. When Henry had shot him earlier, Compton had been moving slightly, and the .29 grain bullet from the old .22 target rifle had hit the back of his head at a shallow angle. It had glanced off his skull, chipping the bone slightly and tearing a gash in the skin without doing any real damage. Compton had initially been stunned by the blow to the back of his head and had ended up lying chest down, with his face turned away from the man who had stopped their raid. Compton had heard every word his enemy had said and now correctly estimated that he was about 10 feet away. The agent tried to roll over and bring his weapon to bear on the man who had shot him. At 10 feet, Henry Bowman didn't need to use sights. In 9/10 of a second, he put 3 rounds into a 3-inch circle immediately in front of Ralph Compton's right ear. "I'm afraid I outrank you, Mr. Blair," Henry continued in a conversational tone, as he put the high-standard safety back on and slid the barrel of the weapon back in his pocket. "And I have to say, I don't hold much respect for you guys in F Troop. None of us do." He saw that the black woman had closed her eyes and was clenching her teeth. "Who sent you? What are you doing here?" Wilson Blair was starting to become hysterical, and he hated it when other feds referred to ATF as F Troop. "We had this all set up," he yelled, then managed to calm himself. "You don't know what you've meddled in," he went on. "We're going to get Kane, Millett, and Bowman all at the same time, and now you people are mixing in." Bowman, Henry thought. He felt as if he had been hit with an electric prod at the mention of his own name, but he remained silent. "Call out the rest of your squad and let's get our story straight about what happened here," Blair said beseechingly. "And, what agency sent you?" he added as he lowered his hands. "Put your hands back on top of your head," Henry Bowman instructed as his mind furiously tried to accept the implications of what the man was saying. What the hell is going on here? Henry asked himself. The great relief he had felt at still being alive, healthy and in control, had been replaced by a feeling of dread. "What's this guy talking about? He really does believe I'm a Fed. But he's not afraid I'll arrest him. He wants us to get our story straight, for Christ's sake. And that can only mean—" Henry looked over at the black woman. "What's your name?" he demanded. "Special Agent G.G. Jackson," the woman snuffled. "Oh, fuck," thought Henry Bowman, and then he remembered the old saying common to both resistance fighters and criminals. The first one's expensive, but after that, they're all free. He sighed inaudibly. "I guess I'll figure out what I'm going to do while she's taping him up." Suddenly, Henry remembered something from many summers ago, before he was old enough to drive what was that kid's name that I let go? Nat, that was it. The barest beginnings of a plan were starting to form in his mind. Maybe I can use what he and his cousin were fixing to do before I came along and broke up their party. Got a lot of stuff to get done before I start in on that, though, he told himself. Then he smiled. "Well, Special Agent G.G. Jackson," Henry Bowman said brightly as he reached into the canvas bag and pulled out a roll of duct tape. "You've just received a temporary interagency lateral transfer.